Hello, everyone, and welcome to Eclipse IDE webinar. My name is Serena, and joining us today is Martin, Kathryn, Leif, and Ned, who will be presenting 4 talks with us today. If you have any questions for them, of any of them, as we move through today's presentation, feel free to ask them in the chat or use the Ask a Questions tab. Without any further delay, over to you.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for inviting me to this webinar. I'm super happy to be here. So let me quickly share my screen so that you can see my slides over here. And my name is Martin. I work for VMware and I work on the Spring tools. So I would like to show you basically what is new and what's up in the Spring tools land for Eclipse. And for that, let me just show some slides. Basically what is new. Usually I would share some details about the getting started experience in the Spring tools for Eclipse and for the coding and navigation experience. But today, since it's just a very short and limited time slot, I will focus on live information showing up in your IDE from running Spring Boot applications. And I will show you the brand new feature to upgrade your projects to the latest Spring Boot versions. So with that, let's go ahead and directly jump to the IDE. So I'm using the Eclipse IDE or the Spring Tool Suite distribution based on Eclipse with the Spring Tools pre-installed. And what I have here in my workspace is a simple Spring Pet Clinic project. You can see there's a kind of a welcome controller. I inject some welcome message provider here, for example, some regular Springy stuff that you have in your Spring Boot projects. So nothing really fancy or serious here. So let me quickly start up my Pet Clinic project. And what you will see is that if I jump to that, there is the welcome message provider being injected, and it tells you hello, but it's the default one that is showing up here, right? It's kind of the default one. I can click around and everything else looks fine in my Springy application, so that is all good. But somehow this is weird. But how do I find that out? Usually, I need to think about the source code, and I look at the source code and think about, oh, I put the auto-white annotation on it. There's a bean that I implemented. Everything should be fine, but the running system is not behaving in the same way. So what the Spring tools do for you in this case is, once you have the Spring Boot actuators on your class path or on your Spring Boot modules, the actuators give you information from the running Spring Boot application. So they basically provide information to the outside world, what is going on inside of this application. And this is what we try to surface here, and not just give you information, for example, that you can see here about, oh, here are all my beans of the running app, and here is the environment and how that is configured in my app, and here are the request mappings that are active in my running application. I could navigate, but that's great, right? That's the information from the actuators. But we can do one step, we can go one step further. We can do a little bit more for you. We can put that information directly where it belongs. And it belongs to the source code where you actually implemented those beans and where you configured the dependency injection and things like that. And this is what you will see with these green highlights here. So for example, if you hover over this green highlight, you will see that this annotation is active in the running Spring Boot application. For example, this request mapping is active, and you can directly jump to this request mapping and, for example, open up a web browser and jump directly to that if you would like to kind of try this out, for example. The welcome controller is also active. You see that this is a bean that actually exists in the running application. Interestingly, you will see here that the auto-white annotation is not highlighted in green, which basically means that this auto-white annotation is not active. It's not. There's nothing being injected in here. So let me try to find out what's going on here. Let me take a look at all the other controllers to see what they are doing. For example, there's the owner repository. Let's see what's going on there. Oh, that looks okay. The bean is already there, and I can see with this bean that the owner repository, for example, is injected into 4 different beans. Injected into the pet controller, the pet type formatter, the owner controller, and the visit controller. I can, for example, also navigate to that directly and see the owner controller is active. It's being, the owner repository is being injected into this controller. I can also see this over here. So I can directly see which beans are being activated, which beans are active, which beans are injected into which other beans, and things like that. But going back to my welcome controller, I see this auto-wire thing is not there. So I will use the symbol navigation that we have to look a little bit around my source code to see what are all the elements that I have in my project. Since I'm looking for something like a welcome message provider, and I see there is one that I implemented over here. Sounds like it's based on a property. I vaguely remember that. So let me jump over, and you can see, okay, this is a welcome message provider that I thought should be around, but the component annotation is not highlighted, so this bean does not exist. Why? There's a conditional annotation on here saying, okay, this bean should only be activated if a certain property exists. And I can hover over this conditional annotation, and it tells me exactly what happens at runtime. In this case, it did not find the property pet clinic as one message. So because of this condition was not fulfilled, this bean was not being created, and this is probably the reason why my system is not behaving as it should be. And I can go to the properties. I see, oh yeah, the property is commented out. So that's probably the problem that I'm facing here. And this is usually something that you can use if you run your app in a certain environment and this application does not behave in the way that you think it should in this environment, but everything runs locally just fine. Probably because something is different in that environment. Maybe something else is configured, something else is dynamically being injected, some other configuration applies. You can use this mechanism to directly see this within the IDE, which is pretty cool. The same stuff works, for example, if you run your Spring apps on a cloud infrastructure, if you run your Spring app in a Docker container on your local machine, you can use the same mechanisms behind the scenes pretty easily, which I think is pretty cool. We call this the live information, and I'm really enjoying showing this to the audience, that this is really a huge step forward from my point of view. The second part that I wanted to highlight here is that you might have seen that we have introduced the new Spring Boot version, the new major Spring Boot version. Spring Boot 3 got released in December. So major step forward, jumping to Java 17, jumping to the Jakarta namespaces and things like that. So it's really paving the path forward for the next generations to come for Spring and Spring Boot. But what happens if you would like to upgrade your projects? Usually, there's a migration guide, and the migration guide tells you all the steps you need to do in order to change your project, update your project. And those migration guides, they exist for the major versions, of course, quite sophisticated, huge migration guide. They also exist for kind of smaller version changes. And what we do in the tooling is, as a first step, we now show you when there's a new Spring Boot version around. My pet clinic, for example, here, it is running Spring Boot 2.7.3, but there's a new patch version out there, 2.7.8. So it tells you this directly within the IDE. You will never miss a patch update or CVE fix any longer. It will directly immediately show that once the new version is being published. And the same applies if you would like, for example, to see are there new major versions. So you can go to the configuration and configure that in the preferences for the different versions. For example, say, a new major version, I would like this as an information, minors as a warning, the other ones as a warning as well. And if you do that, you will see that there's a new major version information showing up as well. The cool thing here is this is not only information that is showing up in your POM file or in your build.gradle file. This also comes at the moment for Maven builds, but in the future for Gradle-based builds as well. It also comes with quick fixes. So you can go and actually allow the tool to make those changes automatically for you. It's like an automated migration guide. It's like a codified version of this migration. So in this case, upgrading to a new patch version that only changes the version in the POM for the parent POM. Fairly easy change. But in case you would like to run the major upgrade to Spring Boot 3, for example, it contains many steps, changing property keys in your property files, changing to the Jakarta namespace, changing stuff to a new Java version, and applying changes to your source code to modernize your source code to work with Java 17, for example. And you can execute that with a simple quick fix as well. This would just execute this project upgrade. And the purpose of that is it should really help you upgrade your project. There's no guarantee that this will do all the necessary changes. When you look at the migration guide, for example, for Spring Boot, for upgrading projects from 2.7 to Spring Boot 3.0, you will see there are some cases where you cannot really automate that to the full scale. You need to make decisions, or you need to look at your code, and you need to think a little bit about, would I like to change it this way or that way? So it's the main purpose is really to automate as much as possible to get rid of this tedious work for you, but there's no guarantee. You should keep that in mind. If you would like to know more about the details behind this, you can also run those upgrades manually. So not by applying the quick fix, which would just run the full-scale recipe behind this, which is, by the way, based on open rewrite. That's why you see sometimes the rewrite recipes here. There's also dialog on action where you can deploy this on demand. And when you look at this dialog, you will see the different recipes that we have at the moment, the different upgrades that we support. The upgrade to 3.0 from 2.7, for example, you can see what happens behind the scenes. It changes the Java version in the POM file, upgrades the Maven dependencies, migrates the Jakarta EE namespace, removes unnecessary add constructor bindings, migrates properties, a lot of different properties that have changed for Spring Boot 3. And I can just go over here and say, yeah, do all of that for me. Of course, I could also unselect or deactivate certain bits and pieces, but this gives you an idea about what's going on behind the scenes. And now when we apply those full-scale migration recipes on this project behind the scenes, it's executing this open rewrite descriptions that actually analyze the project and apply all those changes, and not only to Java source code, but also to POM files, to property files, to things like that. So we can also already see it change the POM file. Let me save the changes to the POM file here because I have that open. And we can basically see, if we compare this, for example, with the latest head revision, what actually got changed in the POM file. The parent version, Java version, it included additional dependencies that I need in this case, updated a few other ones that should be modernized, updated. When I look at the source code that got changed, automatically changed my JavaX persistence namespace, for example, to import Jakarta namespaces and things like that. All that is being automated. The pet clinic sample project does not contain everything, so that's why my demo is a little bit limited, but it gives you an idea about where we are going and what you will be able to do and how we will help you moving forward with Spring Boot versions. And with that, I'm coming to the end of my demo, quick demo. If you want to know more, feel free to contact me on Twitter or go to the Spring Boot project. And with that, I hand it over to the next presenter for today's webinar, which is Kathryn. So welcome and enjoy.
Excellent. Thanks, Martin. That was a really great demo. So really nice to see. Hi, everyone. So my name is Kathryn, and let me just get my screen share going here. And today I'm going to be talking about two projects, mainly the language servers for Jakarta EE and the language server for MicroProfile, kind of talk about what these projects are, why we should care about them. And I'll show these two language servers in action as well with a live demo in the Eclipse IDE. So a quick background on what a language server is for those who may not know. So a quick overview is that the language server protocol is an open source protocol that defines how an editor or an IDE and a language server interact. And this powers many language features, especially in IDEs like the Eclipse IDE or Visual Studio Code. These are language features that you see things like autocomplete, go to definition, find all references, syntax highlighting, quick fixes, diagnostics, all of those. So the language server protocol is defining how those editors and the language servers interact. And quickly, the language server client is the client that consumes the language server. And that's typically built into your IDE, or it's provided via an extension or an IDE plugin. So what this kind of looks like, or why we need the language server protocol, is it really standardizes how tools and servers communicate. So instead of maybe traditional ways where you would need to sort of duplicate work across IDEs or editors to deliver full language support, now you can have one language server that defines all of these language features, and you can extend them into different IDEs or editors with very minimal effort. So you could easily extend to the Eclipse IDE or the Visual Studio Code, Vim or Atom for the language that you'd like to enable. So this is what's powering, the Java support you see in the Eclipse IDE today. So what does this mean for Jakarta EE and MicroProfile? So I'm going to start with Jakarta EE. So as many of you probably know, Jakarta EE is an open source set of specifications that now lives under the Eclipse Foundation. This was formerly the Java EE specifications, and they're aimed at building cloud-native Java enterprise applications. So we saw a need for creating a language server that targets the Jakarta EE programming model. So this is Eclipse LSP for Jakarta. It's an incubator project that currently lives under the Eclipse Foundation. And what it aims to do is deliver additional capabilities on top of the Java support you see in Editor, specific to the Jakarta EE programming model. So things like code complete, diagnostics, quick fixes if you are using a Jakarta EE API incorrectly, rather than catching that at runtime, you would get instant feedback in your editor to correct those mistakes or reuse popular code snippets, things like that. And that will just really help developers more quickly and easily develop with the Jakarta EE APIs without having to figure out or troubleshoot at runtime or look up documentation. You get more feedback in editor. And so right now, like I said, this is an incubator project. The link's there at the bottom, and I can post it in the chat after as well. Under the Eclipse Foundation, right now, the main contributors are from IBM, which is where I am working, but we've also had contributors from the open source community. We've run a program through the Canadian Open Source Academic Program, so we've had student contributors come and contribute to the project as well. And so I'll show this project in action and talk about what features are currently there and where we're looking to go as well. So next is MicroProfile. So MicroProfile is another set of specifications, and it delivers additional capabilities for your microservices, or additional capabilities for building, your open cloud native Java microservices. So it builds on top of some of the core Jakarta EE specs, on top of things like JAX-RS or RESTful Web Services now, CDI, and then offers additional capabilities, things like health check or open tracing, open API. And so there's a very similar project under the Eclipse Foundation called Eclipse LSP for MP. And essentially this is pretty much the same thing, but for MicroProfile. So it's a language server for the MicroProfile programming model. So again, those same set of language server capabilities, code complete, diagnostics, now for the MicroProfile APIs. So you get additional support in your Java files or your MicroProfile config.properties files. And this is also under the Eclipse Foundation. Red Hat is driving most of the contributions there today with some IBM committers. And looking for more open source committers as well. And just to quickly highlight why this is important or why we need these projects, right? So for Eclipse LSP for Jakarta, now we can easily extend the support into our editor of choice. And actually, just in late December, we delivered an early refresh release of the Liberty tools for Eclipse, IntelliJ, and Visual Studio Code plugins. And this is the first early release that is consuming the LSP for Jakarta project. So this is the first publicly available way to kind of try out the Eclipse LSP for Jakarta project and try out that language server support. So these are all on the individual IDE marketplaces. Today I'm going to focus on the Eclipse IDE, but just wanted to highlight that it's very easy to minimally extend these language servers into your different editors. So if you prefer any of the others, you could try those out as well. You can find the Liberty tools on the different extension marketplaces. Again, just highlighting Liberty tools for Eclipse. I have the link here at the bottom. I'll post this in the chat at the end. And with that, I will move into the demo. So let me pull up my Eclipse workspace here today. And here I am, and you can see I've got my Liberty Tools extension installed here. That's the little Liberty icon at the top. And I have this new Liberty dashboard view as well. So this just detects our Liberty projects in our workspace, and then it will let us start our application server for this project, do other options like run tests, stop, view test reports, debug. So I've already run start here in the interest of time, and you can see that it opens a new terminal in Eclipse here, and we can see we're running in dev mode. So dev mode will watch our application for changes and automatically reflect those changes on our server. So to start, I'll highlight some of the LSP for Jakarta language features here. So let's say I wanted to, create a new class here. And I'll just call it, our goodbye controller. And so one of the first language features is snippets or is code snippets. So what I could do is hit Control Space on my keyboard here. And you can see I get all these different code snippets that I could easily insert. And I have both the MicroProfile and the Jakarta EE snippets being delivered here. So let's say I wanted to create a new REST class under this REST class snippet here. If I select that, I get a whole code snippet of a REST class for us to try out. It auto-populates the package, the class name, and we could try this out just as we wanted. So let's say I wanted to say goodbye, at the goodbye path here. You can see dev mode picking up those changes right away. And I could hit that endpoint and try it out. So the idea of the code snippets is for code that you'd quickly need to generate code that is often typed, and then you can get a whole functioning snippet there in your IDE. So let's say I made a mistake here and made this a private method. So typically, you would save your code, you'd redeploy it, and then you'd wait, and you maybe would see from your runtime that you've made a mistake here. But now with the LSP for Jakarta, it delivers diagnostics directly in editor. So you can see I get the red highlighting here telling me that only public methods can be exposed as a resource method, and I even have the quick fix there to correct. So just another way to catch those common mistakes a little bit faster before you go to test your application. Some additional diagnostics. So let's say I have a servlet class here from Jakarta Servlet. If there are other diagnostics like forgetting to extend a certain class, you can see I get annotated classes without web servlet must extend HTTP servlet, and a quick fix for that. It's also some diagnostics around annotation. So, if I forget an attribute, it will tell me that web servlet annotation must define URL patterns or the value attribute, and I can use quick fixes to correct those as well. Right, and then quickly pivoting over to MicroProfile now. So like I said, MicroProfile, or the Eclipse LSP for MP project, delivers code assistance for your Java files and your MicroProfile config.properties files. So let me just pull that up. So here in this MicroProfile config class, I'm injecting a new config property, but you can see that I get this warning here that I haven't set this config property that I'm trying to inject. So if I go to my MicroProfile config properties, you can see I'm getting code complete for values that are referenced in my Java code that I haven't yet set. So I could set it here to injected value, come back to this class, and you can see that warning disappear. Another cool feature is you could hover for more information. So if I hover over, now I can see, oh, I've had this value. It's set in this MicroProfile config.properties class. Here's the value of that as well. All right, so that's just a few of the quick language features. There's many more. And let me switch back to this slide here. So really what we are asking is for community feedback. What do you think? Let us know. Go ahead and go to the GitHub repos, open issues. Again, they're both incubator projects. So we're looking for more feature suggestions, ideas, more contributors, and definitely try out these language servers. So the easiest way to do that today is to grab the latest early refresh release of Liberty Tools. And I have the link there for Liberty Tools for Eclipse. And if there are any questions, I can take them in the chat as well. And with that, I am done my part, so I think I'll pass it over to Life.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm talking today about an initiative from the Eclipse IDE working group, the Extending Eclipse Sponsorship Initiative. In more detail, I will talk about how can we increase the funding for the Eclipse IDE. I will start up with a short introduction and then show what's currently possible regarding sponsorship in Eclipse and what issues and obstacles are there, present a plan from the working group, how we can improve things there. I don't have a demo, but I will guide you through a short click dummy. And at the end, I'm open to question. You can ask questions in the chat because we are here for feedback and kicking off the feedback. So yeah, your feedback is very welcome. So a few words about myself. I'm co-founder and software engineer at Yetta. I'm responsible for the Yetta checkout we will see later. And the things that I do within Eclipse is I'm project lead of the Eclipse Marketplace client. I'm package maintainer for the Java package, and I'm part of the Eclipse Planning Council. And as I said, the work I will present as plan of the IDE working group, where we and many other companies that contribute to the Eclipse IDE are part of. Okay, so first let's start. Why do we need something regarding the Eclipse IDE? So there was a pretty good presentation. I recommend you to have a look at the YouTube video, which is linked here, by Carsten Thoms at the last EclipseCon, who stated that, well, Eclipse is currently losing ground. There are strong competitors in the IDE market like IntelliJ and VS Code. And there's a need to do something. And Kathryn in his talk summed up that we need help, of course, from the community. We need help from experts. We need marketing. And that can be, of course, also be backed by funding. And that's also what we think. And one way to fund open source development is through sponsorships. And the Eclipse Foundation already has kind of sponsorship in the past. The money that was earned there went to the Eclipse Foundation general budget. But good news regarding the Eclipse IDE from this year on, the money will go to the Eclipse IDE working group that's managed there, and then of course also distributed to development regarding the IDE. And we are talking about roughly $75,000 last year. So great, this money is now goes to the Eclipse IDE, was managed by the Eclipse IDE working group. Thank you to the Eclipse Foundation here. And let's have a look how sponsoring is currently working. So individual sponsors can do this here via this website, and also corporate sponsorship is possible here. You see we have currently one corporate sponsor listed here, and with both of these sponsorship methods, there are some issues. For example, for the individual sponsorship, payment methods are missing. So no direct debit with SEPA is possible. Recurring payments can only be done with PayPal, not with credit card, for example. Payment is only possible in US dollar. If you want to use this for corporate sponsorship, you will get no invoice, so that is not a way to do corporate sponsorship. Regarding corporate sponsorship, the manual process, if you want to go this path, is needed. And also, you don't have in-app donations, so you have to leave your Eclipse IDE, go to the web, do the sponsorship there, and in our experience, this really drops conversion rates. Yeah, so we talked about in the working group what can be done here, and we also had a look at this $75,000 again. And if you keep in mind that we have hundreds of thousands monthly users and monthly visitors, that is probably not so much, and things could be improved here. And yeah, our idea was to really streamline the whole sponsorship process so that it's quite easy to from a user to become supporter of the Eclipse IDE. And we want to do so doing three measures. So of course we want to do UI UX improvements. We want to complete the payment methods and different currencies so that individual sponsorship is improved, and we want to enable in-app sponsorship, so that will increase the conversion rates. And yeah, where do we get from there? That happens at the last EclipseCon that we presented, so Yatta presented our Yatta Checkout, which is a product that allows commercial tool developers to sell their products within Eclipse. And Mike, the CEO of the Eclipse Foundation, said, yeah, that's cool. I want that one for sponsorship inside Eclipse. And then we started thinking about it and discussing about it, and then we said, okay, yeah, we can do this, and that could really be a benefit for Eclipse. And yeah, then I started to discuss with my colleagues at the Planning Council, for example, how can it be done technically. We decided, okay, best way would be to integrate it into the Eclipse Marketplace client and make it an optional feature so that every package maintainer can decide if you want to include it or not. And we started discussion with the Eclipse Foundation. So from a legal and administrative things, what needs to be done there to allow payment, for example, to have the text correct, that corporate sponsorship is possible. And let me show you a little click dummy that you get an impression how we think things could work. So currently, if you have installed oomph, you might see some welcome screen like this, where you can donate, or you can also use here the help menu and use donate them. And in-app would then look something like that, since you can select the currency, the amount, if it's one-time sponsorship or monthly or yearly. You can donate, you can select between many payment methods. Let's use a credit card here. If you want to have a correct invoice, you might need billing information. This one is optional, of course. That way you get a correct invoice. And you have to confirm, and then you're done. So you can download your invoice and go back to work. And also for the web, we would have the same features like different currencies, different sponsoring methods. And if you have done a sponsorship before and you decided to store your data, you can reuse your data there. You can also sponsor here. You're done. Perfect. So that's the flow where we believe that this can really improve things. Also added the flow here to the slides, so you can check later. This would be an example invoice with all these VAT calculation and everything that's needed for corporate sponsorship. And we have the IDE working group. We said, okay, let's aim high for the first year with this extended sponsorship. We want to triple the sponsorship. So from the $75,000 to more than $250,000. Ambitious goal, but we think this is possible. And therefore, we kicked off everything that is needed to follow this path. So there's a subcommittee and discussed it in the councils and so on. And as I said, we want your feedback on that, and we want your ideas and your questions. And yeah, for that you can track our progress. We have a GitLab board from the IDE working group. You can join the discussion. There's a issue at the GitLab repository for technical questions. Go to the bug entry at the Eclipse marketplace, which is also linked in the slides, or you can contact me directly. That's it. Yeah, and since we're talking about sponsorship, I want to say, please contribute to the Eclipse IDE. We need your help. Contribute either as open source developer or join the IDE working group so that your company logo is also shown at the slides I showed at the very beginning. Or you can, of course, also use this sponsorship, and don't wait for us to make it simpler. It's also possible right now. It also goes to, was managed by the Eclipse IDE working group. So don't hesitate, and please help now. Yeah, thank you very much. Let me check if there are any questions.
If there's no questions, I'm happy to continue on, but I'm in no rush.
Okay, currently no questions, so yeah, feel free to send me a mail, and I will hand over to Ned, who gives the next talk. So have fun with this one.
All right, thanks a lot, Life. It's really, really important work to get more resources, so thanks for doing that. My kids are asleep upstairs. It's really cold. I've got a ton of coats on. That's why I'm dressed funny. Get my screen share going. So I'm here to talk about a a new project. It's in its infancy, called Equo IDE and Solstice OSGI. It's a new minimalist runtime for Eclipse applications. So Equo IDE is a build plugin. It's a build plugin for Gradle and also for Maven that lets you generate an Eclipse IDE as a build artifact. And right here, we have an example where you set the branding for the IDE, how the title and the icons go. Then you specify P2 update sites and P2 units, features, and categories you want to install. And then you just run gradelu echo IDE, and it'll, where possible, it'll download those dependencies from Maven. But if they're only available on P2, then it gets them from P2 and starts your IDE. So the advantage of this is you can have an open source project that has strange contributing requirements. And you can make it so that your potential PR contributors just type Gradle IDE, and when the IDE starts, they get a web browser that takes them to the contributing guidelines on your GitHub. You can, and whatever unique set of plugins you have, you can set that up. So there's a lot of overlap between this and what the Oomph project does. The difference is that Echo IDE is a build plugin, which means that you're also set up to develop new plugins with your project and with a really tight feedback loop. So this example I just did, the Gradle example, this is taken from the Spotless project, which I'll talk more about later. But you can run this on your machine right now by checking out this PR and running Gradle Echo IDE. For Maven, it looks very similar. For Gradle, we've made a lot of progress using the Gradle build ship plugin to import the Gradle project that you're launching the IDE from, so you have this self-contained project. With Maven, we'd love help getting that working. Same idea, working with M2E. One of the unique things we're doing here is we're not running on normal OSGI. We're running on Solstice OSGI, and I'll explain why now. So OSGI is really powerful technology. It lets you load and unload plugins dynamically. And this dynamic loading means you also get lazy initialization, which means the IDE can start really fast and faster than if it had to load every plugin at startup. And then the big thing is that you can have multiple versions of one class. So you can have Guava 15 and Guava 19 in the runtime at the exact same time. That works because of bundle.load class instead of the more normal class.for name. And so there's a lot of power in OSGI, and Eclipse is built on top of that power. But there are costs to this design choice. The main thing is you have to do import package and export package right. So if you write code, you can't just run it. You also have to figure out this metadata problem before it'll run. You also aren't supposed to do class for name, and this causes ecosystem problems with third-party libraries sometimes. And for new developers especially, it's frustrating that it's not enough to have the classes right. If you wrote the code and the classes are there on the class path, that's not enough. You also have to have all this metadata that you've done right. And because of these costs, developers just aren't learning it very much anymore. So this is the Google Trends for OSGI. And it's a really powerful technology. It's really useful for a lot of stuff. But you lose a lot of contributors by making OSGI a mandatory must-learn thing before you can contribute. So Solstice OSGI is a new take on this problem. To use it looks like this. You put this line of code at the top of your main, and what it does is first, it finds every OSGI bundle on your class path. So there's no config.ini, there's no plugins folder, drop-ins folder. It's just what are the jars on the boot class path. And then at runtime, it reads all the OSGI headers of those bundles. It removes any metadata related to versions. And the idea there is figuring out versions is a problem for build time in most environments. So outside of OSGI, you futz with versions in your build tool, and then when it launches, if the classes are there, they run. So by removing the versions from the headers, contributors don't have errors related to missing versions or mismatched versions. So then there's problems there, right? You might get other errors because the classes don't have the right methods, but if the code is there, it should run. It's frustrating as a new contributor that the code is there, but it won't run. So it fixes that. The other thing is if a bundle is missing, if a bundle requires something in its metadata, and Solstice can see that it's missing. So if you require a bundle and Solstice can see that bundle's not here, or you import a package and Solstice can see there's no package here that exports that, it just removes that requirement from the headers. So you don't get warnings anymore. But everything that was there stays. So it means that your OSGI comes up, the services come up, and you get class not found errors, and which is what new Java programmers are used to. Every other Java program outside of OSGI throws class not found errors. And the key thing that makes this possible, I really want to thank Thomas Watson here, because he started this Atomos project, which is the hard part of this, getting OSGI to run in one class loader and making it possible to modify the OSGI headers. But to do all the tweaking to get Atomos to work is a little tricky. And so the point of Solstice is you just turn on Solstice, and it's like you turned off OSGI headers as a newbie, and you can just put your code in, and if the classes are there, then it'll run. And the goal here is you want to spend your time learning about your customers and the problems your customers have. Ideally, you wouldn't have to learn OSGI or P2. Ideally, you wouldn't even have to learn Java in like some dream world. But for now, you definitely have to learn Java. But I don't think you have to learn OSGI and P2 anymore necessarily. So the cost of Solstice OSGI, so claiming all these benefits, there obviously are some downsides. So it cannot load and unload plugins dynamically. There's plugins on the class path at boot, and that's it. You can't add more, you can't remove anymore. So the easy workaround for this is you have to restart the IDE whenever a plugin changes. And often people have to do that anyway, so it's not so bad. The other thing is there's no lazy initialization. We eagerly initialize every plugin as soon as we can. And which should slow down startup a little bit, but it still feels very fast. And the upside is that the bundles, for a given application, the bundles always activate in the same order. So you don't have to test every possible ordering of what activated first, because you can count on deterministic activation sorting that doesn't depend on user behavior. And then the other thing is, if you have multiple versions of a class that you need at once, Solstice OSGI just absolutely cannot do that. So it means you have to be able to update your transitive dependencies to their latest. But the problem is, if you can't update your transitive dependencies, then your project has died. That's like one of the most important things to of a live project is that it's updating its dependencies and keeping modern. So bring it back to life. If you've got an old project with old deps, like update the deps, raise your minimum GRE, move forward. Like the velocity of everything has accelerated. And if you're used to a very conservative culture, it can be really freeing to just say, screw it, and update everything. And users have the latest JRE a lot more often today than they used to. So the thinking we did with OSGI, we did something very similar with P2. So P2 is a very powerful piece of software. It can manage licenses. It can install and manage hold JREs. It can do binary artifacts with permission bits. It has a very powerful constraint solving system for dealing with these multiple versions of transitive libraries. And best of all, it can download jars. But the issue is, as a developer, if all you want to do is download jars, P2 is a lot. P2 is a lot of code, a lot of transitive dependencies, a lot of complexity, if all you wanted to do was download jars. So we built a new Solstice P2. It's clean slate as far as code base, and the only thing it does is download jars. Read P2 update sites, read the transitive dependencies, and then download the jars. It's 2,400 lines of code, 2 transitive deps, one for HTTP redirects and one for the XZ decompression, and that's it. And so it's really fast. It works offline really fast, and it's a useful component for a lot of different things, and I'll talk about that more. But the kind of easiest thing to get started with is this P2 multi-tool. So for both the Eclipse or for both the Gradle plugin and the Maven plugin, instead of typing echo IDE to launch, you type echo list, and you can with --all, you can browse a whole update site, see what jars and categories it has. You can look at what you're installing just for your application and see, is anything missing? Do I have multiple versions available, and which one is getting picked? And you can just debug all that simply and quickly. The speed is a very important part. So, the story as it stands today is, if you want to build an Eclipse plugin or modify the behavior of your Eclipse IDE in any way, the first step is you have to learn OSGI, and this adoption curve hurts you. The next thing you need to do is you need to learn P2 to be able to get the dependencies and be able to compile against them, and then to publish what you've made, you have to publish it to P2 somehow, which is not as well known as how to publish just a jar. Once you've done those two things, now you can start to solve your problem, build your feature, do whatever you wanted to do. So we've introduced something else, an Echo IDE hook. And this is coupled with the build plugin, because we're launching because we're launching Eclipse from the build. We can also build things right there. So don't learn OSGI or P2, just put the dependencies on your class path, whether they're available on Maven or if they're only on P2. Either way is fine. We can make it really easy for you to put those dependencies on your class path and compile against them. And now write the classes that solve your problem. Pull what you need from the OSGI context if you need to, or if you can get by without it with just static fields, that's fine too. Get the classes you need to solve your problem. You don't have to write any metadata, and there isn't any metadata. We're not generating it for you and hiding it. There just isn't any metadata. You just put your plugin there and it runs. So this works only because you're launching from inside of the build plugin. And we'll see if I have time at the end. But right here is if we look at this pull request, you'll see a diff that shows you just the simplest possible IDE hook. And it shows you how we take data from your build file and put it into the IDE so that you can configure settings or add behaviors, add windows. And then we have a more complicated one, not finished, where we show how to the build ship integration works. So when you run Gradle Echo IDE, the first thing a fresh IDE does is import the Gradle project using build ship. So a very similar idea to Oomph. The difference is integrating with the build plugin. And there's a little bit of a non sequitur, but it's on the same theme of making Eclipse more approachable to developers who are currently outside the ecosystem. So if you want to use an Eclipse jar, until very recently, Eclipse didn't publish anything or almost nothing to Maven Central. Now they do, and it's fantastic. It's a big win, and there's a lot of other projects out there using Eclipse artifacts now, and that's a source of potential contributors in the future. So some are available, but most are still only on P2, and that's I think a problem. But in the meantime, Solstice mixes these very easily. So when a dependency has optional Maven metadata in the P2 stuff, it shows it to you and gets it from there. An example use case here is there's this code formatter called Spotless. It's Facebook uses it, Google uses it, got millions of downloads, and it's a code formatter. And one of the things it does, one of the code, it integrates with a lot of code formatters, but the first one of the most popular, is the Eclipse code formatter, the Eclipse JDT, and also the Eclipse CDT and Eclipse Groovy and Eclipse Web Tools platform. It works with all of these, but the only way that Spotless could do that was by downloading a P2 site of all the CDT dependencies, mushing the ones that it needed together into a fat jar, and then publishing that fat jar to Maven Central, and then users would grab that. And that was a manual process that had to happen for each new release of CDT or any Eclipse project. So it was very labor intensive, and what it meant was that the Eclipse formatter within Spotless was often out of date, whereas the other formatters, like Google Java format or Palantir format, KT-Lint, whatever, those are up to date. And so it makes it seem like the Eclipse stuff is unmaintained or loose or rattly. And it's just because it takes so much effort to stay up to date. So at Spotless now, we've got a PR going where we use the Solstice P2 engine so we don't have to make the fat jars anymore. So we calculate dependencies, download from Maven if we can. If we can't, we download it from P2, and it's all seamless from the user's point of view. It makes it so much easier to leverage Eclipse artifacts. So you can see that here. And I'm out of time, but basically Eclipse and its community are amazing. It's amazing technology. It's amazing programmers. It's very difficult to get started. OSGI and P2 are complex. They're a big part of the onboarding problem, but they can be optional, and you can develop Eclipse IDEs without OSGI or P2. I think maybe I'm out of time.
Yes, thank you so much. So I wanted to thank all of you for the excellent presentations today. And just a reminder, if anyone in the audience has any final questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat or the Ask a Questions tab. And I'll give you a few moments to do that while I wrap up. So we're also looking to book more Eclipse IDE webinars throughout 2023. If you're interested in presenting, feel free to fill out the form, which I linked in the chat a few moments ago. And family, if you have any feedback for us on the webinars and the talks today, we would love to hear from you. Just click on the green button that pops up and let us know if you enjoyed the talk. So let me just take a quick little second here to see if there's any questions. Just some great comments. Thank you all for the presenters. Thank you everyone for joining. Very informative. Thanks all, which is great. No questions in the ask questions. No. So that's it. So again, thank you all so much. And you have yourselves all a wonderful day. Take care.